Right. Hey, everyone, I'm Klloo. So, next section of cards for High Seas up for review, we have Necromancer. So let's start off with the Armory Deck, right? So specifically, the new stuff in the Armory Deck. So we have Loot the Hold, Loot the Arsenal, Tricorn of Saltwater Death, Breakwater Undertow, our Graven Juster Corpse, right? Sawbones, Oyster, and Anka, as well as a nice Call to the Grave copy in the Armory Deck for you, right? A single copy, but again, that's still pretty good considering they kind of exploded in price. They are starting to be reined in a little bit, but generally speaking, these are some nice inclusions for our new Necromancer class, right? So we have the sets and we have the Armory Deck to kickstart. Now, in terms of the actual High Seas set, Graven Juster Corpse, I think, does get just generally outclassed by Dread Threads, and then the three allies, Sawbones, Anka, and Oyston, will all feature as marvels in High Seas. So they will be pullable, right? But chances are very scarcely. But you will get 3 copies in the actual Armory Deck. So the main cards to probably look at are Loot the Hold, Loot the Arsenal, our Tricorn, and our Breakwater Undertow. So your next pirate ally attack this turn gets when this hits a hero, they discard a card. If they do, create a gold token. And then Arsenal being when this hits a hero, destroy a card in their arsenal. If you do, create a gold token. So these are really, really nice cards because they are essentially powerful attacks, right? Both of those on hit effects are usually tied to powerful attacks. But because your attack is on board, you're not really going negative in a card to play these. And then you also have the other side of the coin where it all depends on which ally you're actually boosting with these effects. So yeah, these are definitely really strong rares for the Armory Deck, and we'll definitely see play in the actual deck, right? We have essentially Pummel Light, right? Loot the Hold, and of course just Arsenal Disruption is always favorable. Then for our Tricorn of Saltwater Death, when this defends, you may discard a card with Watery Grave if you do draw a card. So a free primer, right, to get a Watery Grave card into your graveyard to be played on your next turn. So there's not a whole lot, right, that I think is comparable to what Gravy wants to do in terms of the head slot. There's the new basic that we'll get to in the actual set. Otherwise, you have something like Crown if you want the starting gold to utilize Gravy Bones' ability, maybe turn 1. Otherwise, just the usual Crown of Providence, Balance and Justice, right? So, yeah, it is a decent effect. You get the block, and then, yeah, you prime your graveyard. Then Breakwater Undertow. So, attack reaction, destroy this. Target pirate ally attack, get to go again. When the combat chain closes, destroy the ally. So, go again for your allies is definitely a premium, right? It's not on too many cards, although there are some other cards outside of Necromancer that will definitely allow you to go a bit wider as Gravy Bones, but these are pretty nice boots, right? They have the block if need be, and then the go again, even at the cost of your ally, does seem really nice, but it probably gets outcompeted just by the defensiveness of quick dodge flexes, since we are in mostly a yellow and blue deck. Now, when it comes to Anka, right, this is the big one to really talk about because face value, its effect is pretty disgusting, but it has already been errated in a sense, right? So the printed text, discard a card with Watery Grave. The next time an opponent draws 1 or more cards, they discard a card, and this is at instant speed, meaning that you could instant this at the end of your opponent's turn before they draw up, causing them to discard. But this has been changed and reflected in its true text, which reads, the next time an opponent draws 1 or more cards, this action phase, they discard a card, right? So it is still a really decent effect, but definitely not a auto-include, auto-utilize, right? Uncontestable, really just detrimental effect, right? Because imagine you could play this on your turn, even if your opponent swings into it, you can still activate its effect. So unless they have a draw for their turn, that's still going to hit their end phase and their intellect draw, right? So it was really, really disgusting. So yeah, it definitely needed to be reined in. Now, as for the equipment, so we have our Compass of Sunken Depth, and we don't have a weapon joining it, so your main hand is free, right? Which could be for a whole range of reasons, but as it stands, Compass of Sunken Depth is akin to basically what we get for Illusionist, right? A mechanical weapon, if you will, rather than a weapon that you can actually swing. So instant tap, look at the top card of your deck, and then the first card with Watery Grave you play from the graveyard each turn gets go again, right? And that's the big impactful one, because even if you can stockpile your graveyard, that the go again aspect is a big limiting factor to be able to just dump a whole bunch of cards. So this is very, very essential to your game plan, especially the look at the top card of your deck. But it being in the offhand and it being equipment, right, means a couple things. One, it's equipment, so it is destroyable, right, which can definitely be really detrimental to Gravy Bones. And then it is the offhand, so you're sort of locked out of for instance, an Arcane Lantern or some other ways to get AB, right? But most people's guess, and mine as well, would be, depending on how Gravy Bones actually fares from the jump, right, we might see a weapon down the line. Then we have Washed Up Wave, Dead Threads, and Headstone. Now, Washed Up Wave does appear in the Armory deck as well, but it is still a common in the actual High C set. Dead Threads is the legendary chest piece and just super, super gas, right? It is better tunic for Necromancer, right? It's almost basically an extra resource every single turn, or every other turn if you want to use it on your opponent's turn even. And then Headstone is, again, a nice card that potentially may compete with the Tricorn, so they both block for the same amount, but this has the instant effect of destroying the top card of your deck, which again, with something like Compass, where you can look at the top card, you can definitely time that, so it's actually something that you want to hit. If it's a blue, that activates Gravy Bones' ability. If it's an ally, that gets you one card to actually play. And then if it has some sort of destruction effect tied to the card, it will still proc. So it is a nice headpiece. And then for Washed Up Wave, when this defends, you may discard a card or destroy the top card of your deck. If that card is Watery Grave, this gets +2. So I'm going to call this Necro Boost, right? Because it seems very akin to Necro Boost, right? You're wanting to hit a specific type of card. And generally speaking, I feel like the majority of the time you're going to hit the top of your deck, especially again, with Compass as the primer. You can instant on your opponent's turn because it will have untapped at the end of your turn, right? So you can try to force equipment such as this, right? So does it outcompete, was it gold-baited hook? Probably not, but it is still really, really nice. Again, similar to the headpiece, it helps prime what you want to do with Gravy Bones, and it's potentially 2 blocks. So that's definitely nice. But overall, the equipment sort of feels like it'll be Compass, Gold-baited hook as the arms, Dread Threads definitely as a chest piece, and then the Tricorn of Saltwater Death, right? Just so you don't have to use the Compass charge, because there are a lot of other cards that the Compass is definitely relevant to as well. And the fact that this redraws if you do hit the Watery Grave card, which you most likely will, because I doubt you wouldn't discard, right? Unless you have the Watery Grave card. So that's the cycle from hand rather than deck, right, is a little bit more consistent. And then, yeah, the Breakwater Undertow is just a way to utilize your allies even with the destruction effect. Does seem kind of nice, right? But again, quick dodge for the more competitive play, I would assume. Now, for the minions, there are a ton to go through. So we'll start with the just stat line sticks, if you will. Aside from Limpet, Hopalong, right, all of them are just weapons, right, without go again. And then Limpet Hop Along is essentially our go again dagger, right, akin to maybe a ninja. So the idea here, you set them up and then you're getting that value by being able to swing them. So they are all decent, fair stats, it appears, right? So for instance, if you have an easier time swinging it, you pay an heftier cost. So Barnacle, pay 2 to set it up, but then it's free to swing for a 4, versus Rigor Mortis, pay 1 to set it up, and then 1 to swing for a 6. So generally speaking, it's just shaping these around the rescue deck and the more functional allies, with the exception of Hopalong, who definitely seems like the auto-occlude, just because, again, go again on your allies seems to be somewhat of a premium when it comes to Gravy Bones. So the impactful allies, if you will. I'm not saying the others aren't taken, right? But these are definitely the big mechanics. So, Charm Friendly First Mate as essentially a taunt, Sawbones as a damage prevention, Shally as a extra block, and then Chowder as some life gain, right? So these are, in my opinion, the defensive allies, right? So, yeah, Charm Friendly First Mates, 4 to set him up, and then instant tap, discard a card with Watery Graves. So again, that's essentially a neutral to positive for Gravy Bones, since you will be able to play that Watery Grave card at some point, right? So even though you're losing a card from hand, you're still retaining it through Gravy Bones' general ability. And then until the end of turn, opponents must choose this as the target of attacks if able. So akin to Arclight Sentinel from Prism, but without the shutdown of the combat chain, right? But still, a really nice effect, especially if you want to preserve certain other allies, right? Then Sawbones Dockhand, 2 to set up, and then instant tap the next time you or a pirate you control would be dealt damage this turn, prevent 1 of that damage, which can definitely help either salvage an ally, right, where if your opponent has the exact damage, for instance, they're scraping through and you're still getting their functional use on the next turn, or if it's something like Charm, your opponent now has to swing a second time into it, or a third time, depending on what they're using to get rid of him. Otherwise, just the prevent 1 to yourself is still just a decent effect, which will most likely make your opponent want to deal with Sawbones before anything else, right? Same with Shally or Chowder, because the longer these stick around and the more use you're getting out of their effects, the worse they become, right, for your opponent. So Shally, the next attack action card you defend with this turn, gets +1 defense, right? So a nice way to just create a 4 block every single turn. So again, once you start getting that repeat value, then it's definitely worth the setup. If you don't have to use it, it's still an ally that you can use for some other cards. I don't necessarily think you would want to really pay the 3 to swing for 4, but it's there if need be. And then Chowder, instant, gain 1 life. right? So Chowder to me, I really like because it's pay 3 to essentially gain at the very least 2 life. Right, you throw it out, you can instant straight away because it's an instant, not an action, gain the life, and then it untaps on your opponent's turn. You can do it even if they're going to swing into it. So it then has the 3 health that your opponent wants to deal with. So it is essentially 5 health of value, right, from the jump. And then again, if your opponent doesn't deal with it, you're just going to get an extra life every other turn. Right, so I do like all these defensively. And then for the other side of it, right, utility and attacking, I guess, we have Scooby, our salty sea dog. When this stacks, you may put a yellow card from your graveyard on the bottom of its owner's deck if you do create a gold token. So if you're nice enough, you can hit your opponents. This could have been a way to, say, switch off, count your blessings or something like that, but I don't really think you'd want to return the value to them, of them being able to replay it, even if you're minusing 1 from the actual life gain. But generally speaking, you're going to use it to salvage a card for yourself, and then generate the gold to feed into Graveyard's ability. So Scooby definitely seems like the big starter ally, right? 0 cost, easy to set up, and then pay 3 to swing for 4 with a pretty strong effect. Then we have Moray, Lefay, and our Cuddy Shark Quick Clip. So both of these do something similar, but different. So we have Moray being a tap, pay 1, instant, put a +1 counter on a target ally, so that can hit any ally on board, which is definitely nice. Again, every other turn you're going to get that +1 counter. On the turn you set it up, if you have the resource floating, especially with something like Dread Threads, right, you're getting 2 counters, almost essentially, even if your opponent tries to swing into it, right? So that's generally nice. And then on the flip side, you have Cuddy Shark, Quick Clip, who is definitely the common variant of our Moray Eel, right? So once per turn action, pay 1, your next ally attack this turn gets +1, go again. So you don't tap him, so you can still swing with him if you want, and the buff still hits any ally. So they are comparable, but I think overall Moray Lefay is obviously a bit more devastating since the counters will eventually stack up. Then on the utility side, we have Oyston, Heart of Gold, who is basically a stat stick, but he has, when this dies, create a gold token, which is definitely nice, especially again with those boots that we saw from the Armory deck. So you could swing with him, close the combat chain, sack him, get the gold token, and then go into other things, or just keep it for your next turn. Right, so 0 to set up. That's easy. 3 swing is definitely nice. And then again, the actual on-death effect, right? Now, Anka, we went through, so it has been neutered, but it is still quite devastating, especially in the right matchup. But it does sort of put him more to the side of tech, depending on the actual matchup, if you know your opponent's going to draw. So Anka counteracts, for instance, Mask of Momentum. Victor's a good target for it, right? Kasai with gold. Brute, right, with their draw discard. That could really be a negative thing. Although they still hit the discard for some of their other effects, so maybe not so much. But generally speaking, it is still a nice effect, cancelling out 1 card to your opponent. It just matters more that they actually have the draw engine in their deck, as opposed to, again, just hitting intellect. And then Kelpie Tangled Mess. So there's definitely high seas currently, but as we get more heroes that actually do tap, then it will be a bit more functional. So action, pay 1, tap target hero or ally. So basically just switching them off for a turn, right? Well, actually 2 turns because they don't untap till your opponent's next turn. Although, generally speaking, it does fall short on a lot of the instants. So, for instance, you go to use this, your opponent gets priority, they still just activate the instant effect anyway, so that ally is no longer tappable. But, you know, turning off Gravy is probably the strongest. Turning off Marlin or Puffin is not necessarily as strong, I feel, right? So we'll have to see what else gets printed for Kelpie to become better and better. Then we have, again, our Necro boost. So all these cards, when they attack or defend, in the case of Blood in the Water, you may discard a card or destroy the top card of your deck. If that card has Watery Grave, this gets X, right? So Jittery Bones and Restless Bones being go-agains are fantastic. So 0-4 go-again, that again continues Gravy Bones' game plan, right? Especially if you're getting that value of hitting the top card of your deck, right? That's a +1, right? Because you can play a Watery Grave card from your graveyard. So that is really, really good. It just matters more about opting and actually reading the top of your deck, which is kind of curious that they didn't try to lean more into it, right? So boost isn't a thing for mech, so it's been cut out, but we still have Ranger with a few cards that, again, want to specifically find an arrow on top of your deck. And then, of course, the Necromancer stuff. So I'm curious that they didn't, go down an opting avenue, right, to make these a little bit more consistent. But yeah, that's where Compass comes into play, and building around these types of effects is definitely going to be a decent game plan because they are strong. Right, a 0-4 is great stats. A 2-6 with Go Again is great stats. They're 3 blocks anyway. And then in the case of the other cards, we have Burly Bones gets Overpower if it succeeds, right? So a 2-6 Overpower, decent. Angry Bones becomes a 2-7, also kind of decent, right? And then Blood in the Water being a massive 6 block if it succeeds. That again sets up a card for your following turn. Or it's just a 4 block, right? It's still really nice, right? As a defense reaction nonetheless. So a solid interaction for our Necromancer. Now, in terms of cards that actually interact with our allies, so we have a Vast Yi, Heave Ho, and Yo Ho Ho. So next pirate ally attack this turn gets go again. Next pirate attack this turn gets overpower. And the next pirate attack this turn gets +1. And then all of them also give the ally, when this hits a hero, create a gold token. And that stockpiling of gold to either filter with Gravy Bones' ability or just cycle with blue cards is definitely good. Or even yellows if you have a dead hand because you have too many allies or something like that, right? So yeah, really strong. Definitely going to zero in more so on the go again though, since that is, again, a premium. Although overpower with some of the other effects is definitely nice. And of course a +1 just to try and force your opponent to block a certain way is definitely decent, right? And your opponent will want to block because you definitely really benefit from gold. Then we have the cards that make use of our allies in a tappable sense, right? So all these cards want to tap an ally to do X. So paddle faster, tap it to create a 0/4 go again, tap an ally on board the ship to give it overpower, and tap an ally to make this a 5 block card. So paddle faster, again being the big one, just converting an ally that you probably want to use for its utility effect. You didn't use it on your opponent's turn, so now it's available. You use paddle faster just to extend your turn, right? It's definitely nice. And then, you know, the overpower, or in general, just these big stat cards or stat attacks, I don't think are as necessary, because if you're obviously leaning into allies, you're leaning into really setting up allies, right? So you'll generally have enough where it doesn't really feel like you want these cards as your turn closer, right? Unless you're really starved for resources. But again, you're going to be in mostly yellow-blue. So they're nice, but I think they get overshadowed by actually just the idea of setting up a massive board state, right, as best as you can. But paddle faster, again, just on Raiders of 0/4, where it doesn't need that extra card investment, definitely good, right? And then hoist them up for the block. You'll always have allies active to utilize it, so, you know, a 5 block is definitely decent, especially in a deck where, again, your allies can't block, right? So you need that extra good value on some cards. And lastly, that brings us to the 2 standout Majestics. So Chart the High Seas, Give No Quarter, and then of course Gravy Bones himself, because we haven't really touched on his ability. So Gravy Bones, instant tap, destroy a gold you control, draw a card, then discard a card. So this filtering mechanic, especially in the case of Watery Grave, where you're setting up more cards to play. Beautiful. And then if a blue card has been put into your graveyard this turn, you may play cards with Watery Grave from your graveyard. And of course, that doesn't have to connect with the discard mechanic. Just playing a blue card in terms of an action will mean it does eventuate to your graveyard. Although a blue go again attack, you can close the combat chain and still do the same thing. So yeah, easy enough to trigger. You really just want the gold to make sure you can line up cards to the best of your ability, right? You compass, you see something on top that you don't like, right? So you draw, discard, and then you gamble, right? Most likely though, you're gonna aim overall for consistency, compass, find the card you want, and then again, use something defensively, or one of those cards that allows you to destroy the top card of your deck. But in terms of Chart the High Seas and Give No Quarter, right? Both these are above rates. So Chart the High Seas, look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You may pitch a blue card from among them, and then put the rest into your graveyard. Create a gold token for each yellow card put into your graveyard this way. This definitely incentivizes, again, sticking to yellow-blue, right? Where allies are our on-raid attacks, and then blue are our extenders, or our valuable utility, if you will, right? Cards that we can use if need be straight away, but generally speaking, they're pitchables into our allies, especially as we're swinging, right? So, Chart the High Seas. If you hit a blue and a yellow, this means that you get 3 resources and create a gold token. You can then use the gold token to get a card back, right, and float 1 resources. So Chart the High Seas in that case could essentially be a activate Gravy Bones, generate a resource, which is definitely nice, right? Generate 2 gold. You can then use Gravy Bones' ability to filter, use the gold and pitch something else to get a card. It's not as clear cut as the gain a resource, but it's still strong. Hit 2 blues, unfortunately, you just get the basically the resource cost of Chart the High Seas, which is, again, is still akin to just pitching Chart the High Seas, right? The only really bad scenario is where you hit, say, 2 reds, right? And nothing happens. But again, that's not generally going to be the case. You're going to compass, look at your deck, and then go, right, blue on top, yellow on top, time to Chart the High Seas, right? But even in the case of, say, hitting 1 yellow, 1 red, and creating gold, think of the other cards that we have to just clean cut, generate a gold token. What comes to mind is Starting Stake. Starting Stake has, it is a 2 block, correct, right? And then it also, no go again, and can't be used if you already control gold, right? Comparable to a blue 3 block that does that. And then also, as Gravy Bones, putting a yellow card in your graveyard most likely means it's a yellow card that you want to play, right? So yeah, definitely like Chart the High Seas. And then of course, Give No Quarter just as your big incentive to play big allies. So next to ally cards with Watery Grave you play this turn costs 3 less to play, giving this a value of 6, right? So twice its actual pitchable. Definitely really nice. And again, in the scenario where you don't have the allies to actually capitalize on the effect, well, you just pitch it as a blue. So yeah, both are really, really nice, right? But in saying all that, I've never really dabbled into board states when it comes to Flesh and Blood. So yeah, if you have insight on Gravy Bones, because he will be, fortunately, the hero that I put last in my list, right? I want to check out Marlin the most, right? Because Death Deal is probably going to go fairly quickly. I definitely want to tinker with Puffin, so then that leaves Gravy Bones, unfortunately, a little bit crunched for time. So any insights, right? Or even just decks, straight up decks. Love to see, just to give myself a little bit easier of a time. Anyway, let me know what you think. Hope you enjoyed. See ya.